The Mafia boss put the ring on the wrong woman, but what she did next made an entire ballroom forget how to breathe. Have you ever been mistaken for someone else, then realized the mistake revealed more truth than the plan ever could? Beneath 12 crystal chandeliers in downtown Chicago, Damian Cross stood before politicians, crime families, and cameras ready to seal an alliance worth billions. But when he lifted his eyes, the diamond was already resting on the hand of Evelyn Hart, a struggling piano teacher who did not belong in his world. She could have kept the ring. She could have begged, lied, or used the moment to change her life. Instead, she looked into the eyes of the most feared man in the city and made a choice no one expected. Stay until the end, because this is not only a story about forbidden love. It is about dignity, power, and the price of becoming someone worthy of a second chance. Like the video and comment where you are watching from. To understand why Damian Cross followed a stranger out of his own engagement party, you have to return to the moment before the diamond touched her hand. 90 minutes earlier, snow was falling over downtown Chicago in slow, silent sheets. The Blackstone Grand Hotel stood above Michigan Avenue like a palace built to keep winter poverty and consequence outside its doors. Black cars rolled beneath the covered entrance, one after another, their headlights cutting through the storm. Drivers opened doors for senators, judges, developers, union leaders, and men whose names appeared on no guest list but were recognized by every guard in the building. Inside, 12 crystal chandeliers burned above the grand ballroom. White roses climbed the marble columns. Hundreds of candles flickered along tables dressed in ivory silk. Champagne waited in narrow glasses untouched until the right people arrived. At the far end of this room, beneath an arch of winter flowers, a raised platform had been prepared for the announcement that half of Chicago had spent months pretending not to know. Damian Cross was going to marry Sloane Whitaker. It was not a love story. It was an agreement with a diamond attached. The Cross family controlled shipping contracts, construction companies, private security firms, and enough union influence to make entire neighborhoods rise or fall according to Damian's approval. The Whitakers controlled political access city development permits and a media network capable of turning rumors into facts before breakfast. Together, they could secure a lakefront redevelopment project worth billions. Apart, they remained powerful. Together, they would become almost untouchable. Caleb Rose stood in the center of the ballroom, checking his silver watch as workers moved around him. He wore a charcoal suit with no visible wrinkle and an expression that suggested the entire building belonged to his schedule. For nearly 20 years, Caleb had been Damian's closest advisor. He negotiated with politicians, settled disputes between violent men, and remembered every secret that had ever passed through the Cross organization. People feared Damian. They trusted Caleb to tell them what Damian wanted. That distinction had made Caleb indispensable. He watched 2 workers adjust the engagement platform. 2 inches to the left, he said. One worker hesitated. It is centered with the arch. It is centered with the room. I need it centered with the cameras. The men moved it. Caleb touched the earpiece beneath his collar. Confirm the west entrance. A voice answered immediately. Secure. The private elevator secure. The press corridor locked until the announcement. Caleb looked toward the event coordinator, a thin woman named Margaret Price who had been moving at the edge of panic since noon. The proposal begins at 9:15, he said. Mr. Cross enters from the East Lounge. Miss Whitaker enters from the side salon. The lights lower after the final speech. No one moves until the ring is presented. Margaret nodded too quickly. Yes, Mr. Rowe. No surprises, of course. Caleb's eyes moved past her toward the grand piano. A woman in a midnight blue dress sat beneath the chandeliers, repairing a torn page of music with a piece of clear tape. She did not match the room. Everything around her had been chosen to display wealth. Her dress was elegant but simple. Her dark brown hair had been pinned loosely at the back of her neck, with several strands already escaping. Reading glasses rested low on her nose. Her shoes looked comfortable enough to survive several hours at a piano, which made them unlike anything worn by the other women in the ballroom. Her name was Evelyn Hart. Caleb had approved her only because the first pianist canceled. He disliked substitutions. They created possibilities. Evelyn smoothed the repaired page and set it on the music stand. Her phone vibrated beside her. She looked toward the ballroom staff, then answered quietly, "Tell me the boiler is still alive." A woman on the other end exhaled. It is making that sound again. What sound? The one that sounds like it is planning to die out of spite. Evelyn closed her eyes. At the Hart Community Music House in Pilsen, Nina Alvarez stood beside an ancient boiler while 2 space heaters hummed behind her. Children's drawings covered the hallway walls. Somewhere upstairs, a student practiced the same 4 notes again and again. "Did you call Mr. Bell?" Evelyn asked. "He called me. He says the rent is late." "I know. He also said tomorrow is too late." Evelyn looked across the ballroom. A florist was replacing a white rose because one petal had curled at the edge. A server carried a tray of champagne that probably cost more than a month of heat for the school. "I received the performance fee tonight," she said. "I will speak to him in the morning. You should not have to play at an engagement party for people like this." "What kind of people?" "The kind who have guards standing beside the flower arrangements." Evelyn glanced toward a broad man near the piano. He wore a black suit and watched the room with the patient stillness of someone trained to see threats before they moved. "The flowers do appear dangerous. Evelyn, I will be careful." Nina lowered her voice. "Rosie asked if the school is closing." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the phone. "What did you tell her, that teachers do not surrender buildings to broken boilers?" "Good answer. It was your answer." Evelyn looked down at the piano keys. The school had survived rent increases, leaking ceilings, canceled grants, and winters when the heat worked only if someone kicked the metal pipe near the basement stairs. It had survived because Evelyn refused to let children believe music belonged only to people who could afford polished instruments and private tutors. Tonight's performance fee would buy time. Not security, not a future, just time. Sometimes time was enough to keep hope alive. "I will be back after midnight," she said. "Keep the heaters away from the curtains. You always say that, because you always put them too close." "I do not." "You absolutely do." Nina laughed despite herself. "Be safe." Evelyn ended the call and placed the phone inside her bag. When she lifted her eyes, she found the security guard still watching her. "Was I too loud?" she asked. His name was Mason Cole. He had served Damian since before either of them had gray in their hair. "No. Then you are staring. I am working." "Does your work require judging my conversation?" "I was not judging." "What were you doing?" Mason glanced at the taped music. Wondering why someone hired to perform at the most expensive engagement party in Chicago is repairing sheet music instead of requesting another copy. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "Because the page still works." Mason looked at the transparent tape holding the torn paper together. "So does the school." Her expression changed, only for a second, then the softness returned. "It will." Before Mason could respond, the ballroom doors opened. The room altered. It did not become silent, but every voice lowered. Men who commanded companies and districts stood straighter. Smiles became more careful. A state senator abandoned a conversation in the middle of a sentence. Damian Cross entered without hurry. He was 42, tall, dark-haired, and dressed in a black suit so precisely cut that it seemed less like clothing than armor. He did not scan the room nervously. He did not need to. Mason's men had already searched every guest, every service corridor, and every place a weapon might be hidden. Damian walked as though nothing in Chicago could surprise him. That belief had kept him alive. It had also made him difficult to know. Sloane Whitaker met him near the entrance to the private lounge. Her silver gown caught the light with every step. Her blonde hair fell in polished waves over one shoulder. She was beautiful in the deliberate way of a woman who had spent her entire life being photographed beside powerful men. "You are late," she said. Damian removed his gloves. "I arrived before the announcement. That was not what I said." A photographer moved closer. Sloane immediately smiled. Damian offered his arm. The camera flashed. When the photographer stepped away, the smile disappeared from her face. "My father has been waiting 20 minutes. Your father has spent 6 months waiting for my signature. 20 more minutes will not kill him. He thinks you are reconsidering." Damian looked toward the ballroom. "I am always reconsidering." "That is not reassuring. It was not intended to be." Sloane studied him. They had known one another for years. They had attended the same charity dinners, funerals, political events, and private meetings. They understood each other's families. They knew which subjects could be discussed in public and which required rooms without phones. They had never spent a morning together, They had never shared an unplanned dinner. Damian knew the names of Sloane's attorneys, but he did not know what song she listened to when she could not sleep. Sloane knew the value of Damian's companies, but she had never seen him laugh. Their engagement made sense to everyone who did not require affection. "Do you intend to look at me tonight?" she asked. Damian met her eyes. "I am looking at you now." "That is not the same thing. What do you want me to say that you chose this?" "I agreed to it." Her mouth tightened. "That is exactly what I mean." Caleb entered the lounge carrying a leather folder. "The Whitakers are ready." Sloane stepped away from Damian. "My father has questions about the final structure." "Your father always has questions after his attorneys have already received answers," Caleb said. "He wants direct confirmation, then he will receive it." Caleb placed the folder on a table and opened it to the signature page. The agreement transferred development rights, political protections, and control of several new companies into a joint structure. The marriage would make the alliance personal in public and nearly impossible to break in private. Caleb handed Damian a pen. Damian did not take it. Sloane noticed. So my father was right. Damian looked at the document. "The announcement is not the contract. It is to the people waiting outside." Caleb spoke with quiet patience. "The public commitment stabilizes the council. The signatures can be completed after the celebration." Damian's gaze moved through the open lounge doors. Evelyn had begun to play. The first notes were soft enough to quiet the nearest conversations. Her hands moved with calm precision, not performing for attention, but creating a space within the noise. A small girl stood beside the piano. She wore a pale pink dress and held several crumpled pages against her chest. Evelyn leaned down to hear her. The girl was Emma Price Margaret's 7-year-old daughter. Her babysitter had canceled, and Margaret had been forced to bring her to the hotel. "Do you know this song?" Emma asked. Evelyn examined the page. "Your school recital." Emma nodded. "I keep getting stuck," where Emma pointed to the middle. Evelyn shifted on the bench. "Show me." The girl hesitated. "My mom says I cannot touch anything. This piano has survived politicians. I believe it can survive you." Emma smiled and sat beside her. Evelyn played the first measure, then let Emma copy it with one finger. The child missed a note. Her face fell. Evelyn played the wrong note again on purpose. Emma looked up. "Why did you do that?" "Because sometimes a wrong note tells us where the right one is." Across the ballroom, Damian continued watching. The melody was simple, nothing like the formal program Caleb had approved, yet it reached him through the noise of political promises and expensive laughter. For one moment, he remembered a dark room from his childhood. His mother at a piano. His father standing in the doorway. The memory closed before it fully formed. Caleb followed Damian's gaze. "The pianist is off program. She is helping a child," Damian said. "The press will enter in 12 minutes. Damian looked at him. "Is the child expected to damage the alliance?" Caleb smiled without warmth. "No." He touched his earpiece. "Ask the pianist to return to the approved selection." A staff member approached Evelyn. She listened, nodded, and quietly returned to Chopin. Emma climbed down from the bench with her music held more carefully than before. Damian watched the girl leave. Then he took the pen from Caleb. Sloane released a breath. Before Damian could sign, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and answered immediately. "Father," her expression sharpened. "What investigator?" She turned away from the men. "No, do not speak to anyone until I get there." She ended the call. "What happened?" Caleb asked. "A federal investigator contacted one of our development partners. Tonight my father thinks someone leaked the zoning documents." Caleb's face remained calm. "Go to the side salon. I will join you after Damian signs." Sloane looked at Damian. "Do not begin without me." "The announcement is scheduled for 9:15, Caleb said. "I said do not begin." She left the lounge. Damian placed the unsigned document back on the table. Caleb watched him. "Do you have another concern? I dislike being rushed. You have considered this alliance for 6 months. I have considered its advantages. They remain unchanged." Damian looked toward the closed door where Sloane had disappeared. People change the moment an agreement becomes permanent. Caleb studied him carefully. This organization cannot be governed by hesitation. Damian's expression cooled. It is governed by me. Caleb lowered his head. Of course. In the ballroom, Margaret hurried between the stage and the service corridor, checking the time. Reporters had begun gathering behind the velvet ropes. Several important guests were preparing to leave for another event. Emma wandered near the engagement platform with her music. One page slipped from her hands, then another. A server carrying champagne turned quickly to avoid her. His shoulder struck a floral stand. The arrangement tilted. Staff members rushed to catch it. Emma crouched to gather the papers, but people moved around her from every direction. Evelyn saw the child from the piano. She stopped playing. Emma had reached beneath the engagement platform for the final page. Evelyn rose and crossed the ballroom. "Stay there," she called gently. "I have it." At the same moment, Caleb received a message from the press coordinator. 2 television crews intended to leave within 5 minutes. He checked his watch. 9:14. Sloane was still in the side salon with her father. Caleb touched his earpiece. "Prepare the announcement." Margaret stared at him. "Miss Whitaker is not in position." "She will be." The lights began to lower. Guests turned toward the platform. Evelyn stepped onto the edge of the stage and bent to retrieve Emma's page. A spotlight came on above her. She froze. Margaret saw the outline of a woman in a dark dress beneath the floral arch. From the floor, she could not see Evelyn's face clearly. "The bride is in position," she whispered into her microphone. Caleb saw Evelyn. He knew immediately that she was not Sloane. For a second, his eyes moved toward the side salon. He could stop the music. He could raise the lights. He could tell Damian to wait. Instead, Caleb looked toward Damian standing in the East Lounge entrance. Damian had opened the velvet ring box and was glancing down at the diamond. Caleb's thumb pressed against the microphone. Now. The ballroom doors opened. Damian entered to applause. Evelyn straightened with Emma's sheet music in her hand. A staff member guided her toward the center of the platform before she could step away. "I think there has been a mistake," Evelyn whispered. The woman smiled tightly, believing it was nerves. "Just face forward." Damian climbed the steps. The applause grew louder. Evelyn turned toward him. For the first time, he truly looked at her. She was not wearing silver. She was not smiling for the cameras. She was holding a child's wrinkled sheet music against her chest. Confusion crossed her face. Damian stopped. From the side salon, Sloane emerged. She saw Damian beneath the arch. She saw the open ring box. Then she saw Evelyn standing in her place. "Damian." Her voice vanished beneath the applause. Caleb raised one hand to the musicians. The final chord sounded. Hundreds of guests rose. Damian looked toward Sloane, but a photographer called his name from the front row. The camera flashed directly into his eyes. Margaret whispered from beside the stage. "The ring. Mr. Cross." Evelyn leaned closer. "Mr. Cross, I am not supposed to be here." Another flash. Damian heard only part of the sentence. He reached for her hand. Evelyn pulled back instinctively, but the staff member behind her stepped forward, trapping her between the floral arch and Damian. His fingers closed around hers. The room held its breath. The diamond slid over her knuckle. It fit. Sloane reached the edge of the crowd. Her face had gone white. "That is not the woman you are supposed to marry." The applause broke apart. Evelyn stared at the ring. Damian lifted his eyes and finally understood what he had done. A glass struck the floor. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else laughed and immediately regretted it. Caleb stood near the stage with both hands folded in front of him. His expression revealed nothing. Evelyn slowly raised her gaze to Damian. For one suspended moment, the most feared man in Chicago and the woman who had only come to save her music school stood beneath the chandeliers as though the entire room had disappeared. Then a camera flashed. Across the ballroom, a phone screen lit with the first photograph. By sunrise, the photograph had already escaped the ballroom. It appeared first on a local gossip account, then on television screens in hotel lobbies, coffee shops, police stations, and office towers across Chicago. The image showed Evelyn standing beneath the white roses with Damian Cross holding her hand. The diamond caught the light between them. Sloane Whitaker could be seen in the background, frozen near the edge of the crowd. The photograph did not show Emma's sheet music. It did not show the confusion in Evelyn's face. It did not show her returning the ring. The headline beneath it read, "Chicago Crime Boss Proposes to Mystery Woman." By 8 o'clock, a second photograph appeared. This one captured Evelyn placing the ring in Damian's palm. The new headline was worse. Damian Cross rejected before 300 witnesses. At the Hart Community Music House, Frank Delaney unfolded a newspaper during his morning lesson. The building smelled faintly of coffee dust and the old radiator struggling against the cold. Snow had gathered along the lower windows. Somewhere in the next room, a child played the opening notes of the same scale 6 times without improvement. Frank adjusted his glasses. This woman looks familiar. Evelyn kept her eyes on the music in front of him. "Your left hand, Frank." He lifted the newspaper higher. "It says here she broke the heart of the most dangerous man in Chicago. That seems dramatic. It also says she may be an international jewel thief. That seems more interesting." Frank placed the paper on the piano. "Should I be concerned that my teacher has a secret criminal life? You should be concerned that you have avoided practicing Measure 12 for 3 weeks." Frank sighed and returned his hands to the keys. The classroom door opened. Rosie Alvarez rushed inside wearing a purple winter coat and one untied boot. She carried a sheet of gold star stickers in one hand. "Miss Hart, did you marry the scary man?" "No." "Did he ask you?" "Not exactly." Rosie stared at her. "How do you not exactly ask someone to marry you?" "He put a ring on my hand before checking who I was." Rosie considered this carefully. That was not smart. "No. Was the ring pretty?" "Yes. Did you keep it?" "No." Rosie's face filled with genuine disappointment. "You never keep anything interesting." Nina entered behind her daughter and locked the front door. 2 photographers stood across the street beside a dark sedan. Another man waited near the corner with a camera hanging beneath his coat. Nina glanced toward the window. "They have been there since 7. Evelyn looked outside. One photographer lifted his camera. She stepped away from the glass. "They will get bored. They are calling the school. Do not answer questions. They are also calling parents." Evelyn's expression tightened. Rosie noticed. "Are they bad people?" "No," Evelyn said. "They are people who want a story before they know what happened." Rosie looked at the newspaper. "Why don't you tell them?" "Because some people do not ask questions to hear an answer." Frank played the wrong chord. Evelyn turned immediately. Again. Frank looked at her over his glasses. "Your life is currently on every television in the city, and you are still rushing the 3rd measure." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." For the next hour, Evelyn taught as though the cameras did not exist. She corrected posture. She counted rhythm. She knelt beside a nervous boy who had forgotten where to place his fingers. Each time the telephone rang in the office, Nina silenced it. Normal life continued one note at a time. Across the city, normal life had become impossible inside Cross headquarters. The top-floor conference room overlooked the river. Gray morning light pressed against the windows. 12 men sat around a black table while television coverage played without sound on the wall. Damian stood near the glass with the closed ring box in one hand. He had not slept. Sloan sat at the opposite end of the room beside her father, Senator Richard Whitaker. Her posture remained perfect, but anger had sharpened every line of her face. Richard struck the table with 2 fingers. "You will issue a statement before noon." Damian did not turn. What statement? That the woman was confused, that the incident was staged by an employee, that your engagement to my daughter remains unchanged. Sloan looked at Damian. "Is it unchanged?" Caleb stood near the screen with a file open before him. "The market reaction is manageable," he said. 2 development partners have requested clarification. The council members are waiting. A public appearance tonight would settle the matter. Damian finally faced them. "You want me to put the ring on Sloan in front of another room of cameras?" Richard leaned back. "I want you to honor the agreement. The agreement has not been signed." The senator's face darkened. "You stood in my home and gave your word. I agreed to consider a marriage that served both families." Sloan rose. "Do not speak about me as though I am a shipping contract." Damian met her gaze. "That is how everyone in this room has treated you since the negotiations began." Her anger faltered. Only for a moment. Then she looked toward the screen where the photograph of Evelyn returning the ring remained frozen. "You followed her out?" "Yes." Why? Damian looked at the image. Because she had not trembled. Because she had looked at a ring worth more than her school and returned it without hesitation, because she had spoken to him as though his name carried no weight. He closed the velvet box. I owed her an apology. Richard laughed once. Men like you do not apologize. Damian's eyes moved to him. Men like me do many things when necessary. Caleb stepped between the silence before it became dangerous. We need to focus on the damage. Miss Hart has already become the center of the story. If she speaks publicly, she could weaken both families. She will not, Damian said. Caleb looked at him. You are certain she had the entire ballroom listening? She said only what was true. That does not make her harmless. Damian's voice became quieter. No. It makes her unusual. He placed the ring box on the table. Find the music school. Caleb did not move. For what purpose, I told you. I owe her an apology. A private message can be delivered. I will deliver it. Richard stood. You are risking a billion-dollar alliance because a pianist embarrassed you. Damian walked toward the door. She did not embarrass me. He stopped beside Caleb. She corrected a mistake. The room remained silent after he left. Caleb watched the door close. Then he looked at the ring box on the table. By early afternoon, 3 black vehicles stopped outside the Hart Community Music House. Every child in the front classroom rushed to the window. Rosie climbed onto a chair. The scary man brought more scary men. Nina pulled her down. Do not stand on furniture. He is getting out. The front door opened before Damian reached it. Evelyn stepped onto the sidewalk and closed the door behind her. Snowflakes settled in her hair. Damian stopped a few feet away. Mason stood behind him with 4 armed guards. Evelyn looked from Damian to the men. No weapons inside. Mason's expression did not change. Damian glanced at the building. It is a music school. Yes, I am aware. Then you understand why armed men would make parents uncomfortable. They remain with me. Then you remain outside. The wind moved between them. A bus passed at the end of the block, spraying gray water against the curb. Damian looked at Evelyn as though he were waiting for her to reconsider. She folded her arms against the cold. He removed the handgun beneath his coat and handed it to Mason. Mason stared at the weapon in his palm. Boss. The weapons stay in the cars. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. Damian stepped toward the door. Evelyn did not move. All of them. Mason gave the order. One by one, the men placed their weapons inside the vehicles. Only then did Evelyn open the door. The warmth inside smelled of crayons and old wood. Children watched from every doorway. Handmade paper notes hung from the ceiling. A sign above the front desk read, "Mistakes are proof that you are trying." Damian paused beneath it. Rosie whispered to another child, "He is taller on television." Evelyn led him into an empty classroom. The upright piano had scratches along its side and one key stained slightly yellow. 2 folding chairs stood near the wall. Damian remained standing. I came to apologize. Evelyn waited. He had negotiated peace between men who had murdered one another's relatives. He had faced federal prosecutors without changing his breathing. Yet the simple sentence appeared to resist him. I should have looked at you before placing the ring on your hand. That would have helped. I also should have prevented the press from using your name. Yes. Damian watched her. Most people rush to rescue powerful men from discomfort. Evelyn gave him nowhere to hide. I am sorry, he said. Her expression softened slightly. Accepted, that is all. What else were you expecting, anger? I was angry. You do not appear angry. I teach children. Anger cannot be allowed to drive every decision. Damian glanced toward the hallway. What about the photographers? They will leave. I can make them leave. Evelyn studied him. I am sure you can. He heard the warning beneath the words. I did not come to threaten anyone. Good. She turned toward the door. Was there something else? From the next room came a series of uneven piano notes. Damian looked toward the sound. A boy struck the same key too hard, paused, then tried again. I want lessons, Damian said. Evelyn turned back. Lessons piano. Do you play no? Have you ever studied music? No. Why start now? Damian looked at the sign above the desk again. Because I appear to need practice. For the first time, Evelyn nearly smiled. She walked to the front desk, opened a drawer, and handed him a paper form attached to a clipboard. Damian looked down at it. You know who I am. The form does not. He read the first line. Full name. Is this necessary for every student? I am not a child. Then the handwriting section should be easier. He took the pen. Under previous musical experience, he wrote none. Under reason for enrollment, he paused. Evelyn watched him from behind the desk. Finally, he wrote, "To learn how to listen." She read it, but made no comment. His first lesson began 10 minutes later. Evelyn seated him at the upright piano. "Place your hands on the keys." Damian did. "Relax your shoulders. They are relaxed. They look prepared for an invasion. They often are. This is middle C." She touched the key with one finger. "It has no political influence, no armed protection, and no interest in your reputation." Damian looked at her. "Is every lesson like this only when the student argues before playing a note?" He pressed the wrong key. The sound struck the room sharply. Rosie appeared in the doorway. That was bad. Nina reached for her daughter's shoulder. "Rosie." Damian turned. The child did not retreat. She pointed at his right hand. "Your thumb is wrong." Evelyn gave her a look. Rosie lowered her voice. "It is still wrong." Damian studied the child. "Show me." Rosie entered, climbed onto the bench beside him, and placed her small hand over the keys. "Like this." She played the note. Damian copied her. The sound came clean and soft. Rosie peeled a gold star from her sheet and pressed it onto the back of his hand. For not arguing. Mason watched through the glass in the classroom door. He had seen Damian receive medals from politicians and gifts from foreign businessmen. He had never seen him stare at a sticker with such confusion. The following Tuesday, Damian returned. Then again on Friday. At first, he approached the piano as he approached everything else. He expected discipline to produce immediate obedience. He purchased a grand piano for his penthouse. He hired a technician to tune it twice. He practiced scales with the intensity of a man preparing for war. His hands refused to cooperate. During his third lesson, Evelyn stopped him in the middle of a piece. "You are forcing it. I am playing the notes. You are attacking them. They are keys. They can still tell." Damian looked at the page. "I practiced this for 2 hours. You practiced the mistake for 2 hours." His jaw tightened. Evelyn waited. Then he started again. He missed the same note. Rosie, working at another piano, looked over. Still bad. Damian did not turn. "I am aware. Do not become discouraged." He glanced at her. "Was that encouragement? My mom says I have to be supportive." Damian looked toward Evelyn. She was trying not to laugh. Something in him loosened. A quiet laugh escaped before he could stop it. Everyone in the room went still. Mason looked through the doorway as though he had heard a gunshot. Evelyn smiled. "There, your shoulders finally relaxed." Weeks passed. Damian began arriving early. He waited when another lesson ran late. He carried his own music books. He stopped looking toward Mason each time someone entered the building. He also began noticing what Evelyn never mentioned. The radiator near the front classroom barely worked. 2 students shared one lesson book. One piano bench had been repaired with wood glue. The ceiling above the office carried a dark stain from an old leak. One evening, he placed an envelope on Evelyn's desk. She opened it and saw the amount written on the check. This could repair the entire building. That is the purpose. She returned it. No. Damian stared at the envelope. "The school needs money." "Yes, I have money. I noticed." "Then explain the problem. You believe money ends the conversation. It often does. Not here." He folded his arms. "What do you want? I want you to sit down and practice. I am offering to replace every broken instrument in this building. And I am telling you that generosity without listening can become another form of control." The words landed between them. Damian looked toward the children's drawings on the wall. No one in his world would have refused the check. No one would have risked offending him for the sake of a boundary. He picked up the envelope and placed it inside his coat. Then he walked to the piano. Evelyn sat beside him. Measure 8. He opened the book. Measure 8 is poorly written. It is written for 8-year-olds. That does not improve it. It does explain why Rosie can play it. From the next room, Rosie shouted, "I can hear you." Damian looked down at the keys. Then he began again. Outside, evening snow covered the black cars parked along the curb. Inside, the feared head of the Cross organization played 5 uncertain notes beneath a paper sign about mistakes. The first 4 were wrong. The 5th was not. The fifth note stayed in the room longer than the others. Damian looked down at the piano as though the instrument had finally agreed to speak with him. Evelyn did not praise him immediately. She let the sound fade. Then she reached for the gold star stickers Rosie had left on the music stand. Damian glanced at her. "Do not. You earned it. I am 42 years old. And yet you played the measure correctly." She pressed the star onto the corner of his music book. Damian stared at it. "That is going to remain there unless you plan to argue with a sticker." From the next room, Rosie called, "The sticker will win." Evelyn laughed. Damian closed the book, but he did not remove the star. The following morning, the change followed him into Cross headquarters. A cold rain had replaced the snow, turning the Chicago River into a sheet of dark metal. Inside the top-floor conference room, the men around Damian's table argued over a shipping contract tied to 3 warehouses on the south side. Victor Hale, one of the senior executives, stood at the screen and pointed toward a set of numbers. The delay came from the junior analyst. She failed to account for the new inspection schedule. At the far end of the table, a young woman named Claire Monroe sat with her hands folded tightly in front of her. "That is not what happened," she said. Victor turned. "No one asked you." Claire lowered her eyes. Damian looked up from the report. "Let her finish." The room went silent. Victor hesitated. "She is new. That does not make her wrong." Claire swallowed. "The inspection schedule was included. The problem is the warehouse capacity. The report assumes all 3 locations can process the same volume, but the Ashland site lost 2 loading bays after the fire." Victor waved one hand. "That is not relevant." Claire reached for the file. "It changes the projected cost by almost $8 million. Damian extended his hand. She passed him the report. He read the page, then turned to the photographs attached at the back. The damaged loading bays were clearly visible. Damian placed the report on the table. "She is right." Victor's face tightened. "Boss, the timeline is already approved. Then the timeline is wrong. No one moved." Damian looked at Claire. "Correct the projection, yes, Mr. Cross." Then he turned to Victor. "And next time, listen before you decide someone is too young to understand the room." Victor sat down without answering. Caleb Rowe had watched the entire exchange from the chair beside Damian. When the meeting ended, the others gathered their papers and left quickly. Claire paused near the door. "Mr. Cross." Damian looked up. "Thank you." He gave a small nod. After she left, Caleb closed the conference room door. "You embarrassed Victor." Victor embarrassed himself. "You have corrected people in private before." He dismissed an accurate warning in front of everyone. Caleb walked toward the windows. "People are noticing changes." Damian placed his music book inside his briefcase. "People notice anything that interrupts their boredom. They are beginning to wonder whether Miss Hart has influenced you. She teaches piano. She also convinced you to sit in a room where children criticize you. They are usually correct." Caleb studied him. "That answer would have concerned you a month ago." Damian closed the briefcase. "What concerns me is an $8 million mistake created by a man who refused to listen." Caleb looked at the corner of the music book before it disappeared beneath the leather flap. A gold star was still visible. His expression remained pleasant. Only his eyes changed. That Friday, Evelyn found Damian waiting outside the music school before the doors opened. He stood alone beneath the awning while Mason remained beside the car. Rain moved through the street lights in silver lines. Evelyn unlocked the door. "You are early. I was told that was considered respectful." "It can be." She stepped aside. He entered carrying a wooden box. Evelyn looked at it. "What is that, a metronome?" "We already have one. Ours is broken. It works if you tap the side. That is not the same as working." Damian placed the box on the piano and opened it. Inside sat a polished mechanical metronome with a brass pendulum. Evelyn touched the wood. "This is beautiful. It is accurate. That is what you admire about it. It does not improvise." She looked at him. "You may be studying the wrong art form." He removed his coat. For the next hour, Evelyn made him play the same 16 measures until his hands stopped racing ahead of the rhythm. Each time he became impatient, she reset the metronome. When the lesson ended, she gathered several folders from her desk. "What are those programs for tomorrow night?" "The Veterans Concert." She looked surprised. You remembered. You have mentioned it during every lesson for 3 weeks because you rarely listen. I am improving. He reached for a program. The cover showed a simple drawing of a piano surrounded by hands of different ages. Hart Community Music House presents songs of service, he read. The students designed it. Who is performing children veterans, 2 nurses from the county hospital, and anyone else brave enough to survive a stage? Damian glanced at the list. Frank Delaney. He has been preparing for months. He appeared ready to escape through the wall during my first lesson. He still does. Then why is he performing? Because fear does not always mean stop. Damian looked at her. Evelyn had already turned toward the office carrying the folders against her chest. He watched her cross the room. Caleb would have called the concert sentimental. Victor would have laughed at the idea of adults exposing weakness in public. Damian understood both reactions because they had once been his own. Now he found himself asking Mason to clear the following evening. The concert took place in the auditorium of an old neighborhood church. The building had chipped stone steps, narrow hallways, and a heating system that clicked loudly between songs. Every seat was filled. Parents sat with coats folded across their laps. Veterans occupied the first 3 rows. Children ran through the aisles carrying music stands and whispered instructions no one appeared to understand. Damian entered through a side door with Mason. Several conversations stopped. Evelyn saw him from the stage and walked down the aisle. You came. You sound surprised. I assumed a room without senators would not interest you. There are no senators. Not intentionally. She looked behind him. Where are the others in the car? No weapons, Mason is offended that you keep asking. Mason said nothing. Evelyn smiled. Sit wherever you like. Damian glanced toward the front row. Every seat there was occupied by veterans. He chose a folding chair near the side wall. The concert began with 6 children playing a simple rhythm piece. One entered too early. Another dropped a drumstick. The audience applauded as though they had performed at Carnegie Hall. Damian watched Evelyn from the edge of the stage. She never looked impatient. When a child missed a cue, she gave the smallest nod. When an elderly woman forgot where to begin, Evelyn quietly hummed the first note until the memory returned. Then Frank Delaney walked toward the piano. He wore a dark suit that looked older than some of the students. His left hand trembled against his side. The room became quieter. Frank sat on the bench. He placed both hands over the keys. Nothing happened. Evelyn waited in the wings. Frank stared at the sheet music. His breathing became shallow. Someone in the audience shifted. Frank pulled his hands away. I cannot, he whispered. Evelyn crossed the stage. She did not touch him. You do not have to prove anything, she said. The microphone carried her voice through the auditorium. Frank looked toward the rows of veterans. Then why am I here to share the part of the song only you can play? His eyes filled. What if I miss the ending? Then we wait while you find it. Frank looked down at his hands. For several seconds, the only sound in the auditorium was the old heating system clicking beneath the floor. Then he placed his fingers on the keys. The first notes of America the Beautiful emerged slowly. His timing was uneven. He missed a chord in the second measure. No one moved. Frank continued. Near the end, his left hand froze. The melody stopped before the final chord. Damian leaned forward. Frank closed his eyes. Evelyn stood in the wings, breathing slowly with him. Frank tried again. The final chord sounded. Damian rose before anyone else. The audience followed. Frank looked out at the standing crowd and covered his mouth with one trembling hand. Evelyn stepped onto the stage and embraced him. Damian remained standing long after the applause began to fade. During intermission, the hallway filled with coffee paper cups and nervous conversation. Damian stood near a window when a tall man in a dark blue suit approached Evelyn. He had silver at his temples and the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to walking into rooms where people recognized him. Mason noticed Damian watching. That is Julian Reed. Damian did not look away. I know who he is. Julian had conducted major orchestras in New York, Boston, and Los Angeles. He also chaired an arts foundation with enough money to build schools rather than merely repair them. He handed Evelyn a business card. Anyone can teach a gifted child, Julian said. You teach people who have already decided they are incapable. Evelyn looked toward Frank, who was surrounded by veterans near the coffee table. They usually become the most patient students. I have been developing a program for community music centers. Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, St. Louis. Places where arts funding disappears first. That sounds ambitious. It is. And expensive. I know people who enjoy spending money when the room is full of cameras. Evelyn laughed. Julian smiled. I would rather give it to someone who understands what happens after the cameras leave. A server passed between them. Julian placed one hand lightly against Evelyn's elbow to guide her aside. Damian's gaze dropped to the contact. Mason took a slow drink of coffee. You have negotiated peace between men who tried to kill you? Damian looked at him. Yes. You appear more disturbed by a conductor touching an elbow. I am not disturbed. Of course. Do you require another assignment? Numar, Mason looked toward Julian, but the conductor may. Damian gave him a warning glance. Across the hallway, Evelyn noticed Damian watching. She excused herself and approached him. Are you enjoying the concert Frank played well? He missed 4 notes. He finished. Evelyn smiled. That is the correct answer. She looked toward Julian. Julian wants to help expand the program. You trust him. I met him 20 minutes ago. That was not an answer. It was the only answer available. Damian folded his arms. He touches people when he speaks. Evelyn stared at him. Then she began to laugh. Damian's expression hardened. You find that amusing? I find you attempting to disguise jealousy as security analysis very amusing. I am not jealous, then Julian is safe. Damian looked toward the conductor. I did not say that. Her laughter followed him back toward his chair. The following Monday, Nina entered Evelyn's office carrying a bank statement. You need to see this. Evelyn took the page. A donation had been transferred into the school's account. The amount was enough to repair the boiler, replace every damaged instrument cover a year of rent, and create scholarships for dozens of students. Evelyn read the number twice. Who sent it? Anonymous donor. There is no such thing. The bank says everything is legal. That is not the same as anonymous. Nina watched her. You think it was Damian? Evelyn looked through the office window. He was seated at the piano playing scales while Rosie counted his mistakes aloud. 7, Rosie said. That was 6. You hesitated. Hesitation is not a wrong note. It is suspicious. Evelyn folded the bank statement and walked into the classroom. Rosie, give us a minute. Rosie looked from Evelyn to Damian. Is he in trouble? Yes. Rosie gathered her music. I knew it. When the door closed, Evelyn placed the statement on the piano. You paid for the repairs. Damian kept his eyes on the keys. You lost count. Did you make this donation? Yes. You should have asked. You would have refused. That does not make avoiding the question respectful. Damian stopped playing. The building needs heat. I know. The children need instruments. I know. Then why are we arguing because you still believe the right result excuses the way you reach it? He looked at her. The donation has no conditions. Every gift from a powerful man has conditions. Name one. Evelyn placed one finger on the statement. Silence, gratitude, access, influence. The expectation that no one questions where the money came from. My money is legitimate. Then you will not object to independent review. Damian's jaw tightened. You want an accountant to inspect my donation. I want the board to know exactly where it came from and how it will be managed. I did not attach my name. That is not the same as transparency. He stood. The room felt smaller when he did. Evelyn held her ground. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Damian looked at the broken radiator near the wall. What do you require documentation? Independent oversight. No control over hiring. No influence over admissions. No publicity. You have considered this. I run a school, Damian. I consider everything that can take it away. The anger in his face changed. He had mistaken caution for distrust. Now he saw fear beneath it. Not fear of him. Fear of losing the place she had built. He sat again. I will provide the documents, and the board approves every expense. Yes. And you do not purchase the building without asking. His eyes narrowed. I had not mentioned purchasing it. You looked at the ceiling during your first lesson. That proves nothing. It proves you were calculating. He almost smiled. The terms are acceptable. Evelyn gathered the statement. Good. Does that mean my lesson continues? She opened the music book. You are still rushing measure 12. The repairs began that week. Workers replaced pipes, tuned instruments, and sealed the stained ceiling. Children pressed their faces to the glass as a new piano arrived. Damian refused to attend the delivery. He did not want his presence attached to the gift. Caleb noticed the transfer during a financial review. He entered Damian's office carrying a thin folder. "You donated to the school." Damian continued reading. "Yes." "Through an independent foundation." "Yes." "Why?" "Because they needed money." Caleb placed the folder on the desk. "Since when do you give away money without influence?" Damian looked up. "Since I decided influence was not required." Caleb's expression remained neutral. "The council will ask whether this is connected to Miss Hart." "The council does not review my charitable spending. They will if your personal decisions begin affecting political alliances." Damian closed the file. "Is that a warning?" "It is concern." For whom Caleb smiled. "For you." That evening, Caleb sat alone in his apartment overlooking Lakeshore Drive. The city lights reflected across the windows. On the table before him lay photographs from the Veterans Concert. Evelyn speaking with Julian, Julian touching her elbow, Damian watching from the wall. Caleb selected 3 images and sent them to a private address. His message contained one sentence: "Make her look ambitious." The first article appeared the next morning. "From mob boss to maestro who will fund Evelyn Hart next." By noon, 3 more outlets had repeated the story. One claimed Evelyn targeted wealthy men to finance her school. Another suggested she had arranged the ring incident after learning about Damian's engagement. A television panel displayed photographs of Evelyn beside Damian and Julian while commentators debated which man offered greater opportunity. No one mentioned the children. No one mentioned Frank. No one mentioned the independent review of the donation. The school telephone began ringing before the first lesson. Nina answered one call and immediately hung up. "What did they ask?" Evelyn said. "Whether you are sleeping with both of them." Evelyn went still. Nina's eyes filled with anger. "I am sorry. You did not ask it." A parent called too. "Mrs. Jennings wants to suspend Caleb's lessons until the attention stops." Evelyn looked toward the classroom where 8-year-old Caleb Jennings was practicing a duet with Rosie. "He has a recital in 2 weeks," I told her. The next call came from a corporate sponsor. They withdrew funding from the Veterans Program. Then the landlord called. He claimed the cameras outside violated the lease and frightened other tenants. By afternoon, reporters surrounded the entrance. A man shouted questions as Evelyn escorted children toward their parents. "Miss Hart, did you target Damian Cross before the engagement? Are you romantically involved with Julian Reed? Did Mr. Cross purchase your school?" A camera moved too close to Rosie. Evelyn stepped between them. "Do not photograph the children." The reporter lifted the camera higher. "This is a public sidewalk. They are minors." Nina pulled Rosie toward the door. The child looked frightened. Evelyn kept her body between the camera and the students until every child was inside. Then she locked the door. The moment the curtains closed, her hands began to shake. She walked into an empty classroom and shut the door behind her. For weeks, she had smiled through Whisper's headlines and strangers waiting outside her work. She had told everyone the attention would pass. Now children were being followed to their parents' cars, sponsors were leaving, the school might lose the building. Evelyn gripped the edge of the piano. Her breathing came too quickly. She closed her eyes and counted. 1, 2, 3. The door opened slightly. Rosie stood in the gap. Miss Hart Evelyn wiped beneath her eyes. "Yes. Are we still having class?" The question struck harder than the cameras. Evelyn looked at the child's music book held against her chest. "Yes." Her voice broke. She cleared it. "We are always having class." Rosie entered and climbed onto the bench. Evelyn sat beside her. Outside reporters continued calling her name. Inside, Rosie placed one finger on middle C. 2 nights later, Evelyn attended a museum benefit because Julian had arranged a meeting with potential grant directors. The gallery was filled with white marble modern paintings and guests who spoke about generosity while checking who was watching. Evelyn stood near the staircase when Sloane Whitaker approached. She wore black, no engagement ring. "You should have disappeared after the ballroom," Sloane said. Evelyn set down her glass. "I tried. Your newspapers kept inviting me back." Sloane's face tightened. "You expect people to believe you want nothing from Damian. I want him to practice. Do not make jokes. I am not. You accepted his money. The school accepted a reviewed donation through an independent foundation. You have an answer for everything. No, I simply answer the questions people should have asked before printing lies. Sloane stepped closer. Men like Damian do not change. They become interested. Then they become bored. Evelyn looked at her carefully. Is that what you believe happened to you? The question landed with visible force. Sloane's eyes hardened. You think being ordinary makes you innocent? No, Evelyn met her gaze. I think treating marriage like a business agreement makes everyone involved lonely. For a moment, the noise of the gallery seemed to move away from them. Sloane looked toward the staircase. My family does not marry for loneliness. What do they marry for? Survival. And has it made any of you feel safe? Sloane turned back. You have no idea what it costs to survive in our world. Evelyn thought of Rosie hiding from cameras, Frank losing the sponsor that funded his therapy group, Nina calculating rent with a broken pencil, and you have no idea what it costs to protect a place where children feel safe. Sloane's expression shifted. Not sympathy, recognition. Then the polished mask returned. He will destroy your life. Evelyn lifted her glass from the table. Then he will not be part of it. She walked away before Sloane could answer. The following afternoon, a reporter pushed through the school's front gate and photographed 3 children through the classroom window. Damian arrived 10 minutes later. He did not ask questions. His men crossed the street, took the cameras, and forced 2 reporters against their cars. One man shouted as Mason removed the memory card from his equipment. Damian stood on the sidewalk with rain darkening his coat. They photographed children, he said. The reporter struggled against the car. You cannot take our property. Damian stepped closer. You entered private property. We are press. You are leaving. The school door opened. Evelyn rushed outside. Stop. Damian turned. Behind her, children watched through the window. One of his men held a photographer by the collar. Release him, Evelyn said. Damian's expression remained cold. They photographed the students. And now the students are watching you threaten people. They will not return. That is not protection. It works. So does locking every door. Evelyn stepped closer. That does not make it a life. The rain fell harder around them. Damian lowered his voice. They attacked you, and you decided that gave you the right to control everything around me. I am keeping you safe. No, you are making yourself feel powerful because someone found a problem you could not solve with money. His face changed. Mason looked away. The reporters stopped struggling. Evelyn's voice softened, but the boundary remained. I care about the man who sits at my piano and tries again after he misses a note. Damian looked at her. I cannot care about the man who believes fear is the only language anyone understands. The words remained between them. Damian looked toward the classroom window. Rosie stood behind the glass with both hands pressed against it. She was not looking at the reporters. She was looking at him. Damian turned to Mason. Release them. The guard stepped back. Mason returned the cameras. The reporters moved away quickly, glancing over their shoulders. Damian remained on the sidewalk. Evelyn said nothing more. He walked toward the car without asking her to forgive him. That night, Damian sat alone at the piano in his penthouse. The room was dark except for a lamp beside the music stand. He placed his hands on the keys and began the melody his mother once played. The first measure came softly, the second was uneven. In the third, he struck the wrong note. His hand stopped. On the music stand lay one of the articles about Evelyn. A phrase had been underlined in black ink. Strategic emotional influence. Damian had heard those words before. Caleb had used them during a private council meeting when describing the danger of personal attachments. Damian read the sentence again. Then he reached for his phone. Mason answered on the first ring. Boss, open an internal investigation. Into the press, into the source. A pause followed. How wide Damian looked at the article, then at the gold star still attached to his music book. Everyone. He ended the call. The wrong note still hung in his memory. Damian placed his hands back on the keys. This time he did not begin again from the start. He found the next note and continued. Damian continued playing until the city lights began to fade against the windows. He missed 2 more notes. He did not stop. By morning, Mason had assembled a private team in an unused office 3 floors below Cross headquarters. No company records identified the room. No assistants entered. No calls were placed through the building system. On the wall, Mason had pinned photographs of reporters, media consultants, shell companies, and bank accounts. Damian stood in front of them with a cup of untouched coffee. What do we know? Mason opened a folder. The first photograph from the engagement was posted by a freelance photographer named Aaron Pike. He received payment from a public relations firm called Northline Strategies. Who owns Northline on paper? A woman in Wisconsin who died 4 years ago. Damian looked at him. That is inconvenient. For her, certainly. Mason turned another page. The firm paid 3 commentators to discuss Evelyn on television. It also sent photographs from the Veterans Concert to 6 entertainment sites. The concert was not public. No. Then someone inside the room provided them. Yes. Damian looked toward the photograph of Julian touching Evelyn's elbow. The angle had been taken from the rear aisle near the side entrance. Caleb had stood there during the first half of the concert. Damian said nothing. Mason watched him carefully. There is more. He placed a copy of a bank transfer on the table. Northline receives monthly payments from a consulting company called Lakeshore Civic Partners. Damian recognized the name. Lakeshore handled research for several cross-development projects. Caleb had recommended the company years earlier. Who controls it? We are still tracing the ownership. Do it without using cross-accountants. Mason nodded. Caleb reviews their work. I know. The room became quiet. Mason closed the folder. Do you want him watched? Damian looked at Caleb's photograph on the wall. For 20 years, Caleb had stood beside him at funerals, negotiations, and hospital beds. He had known which enemies could be bought and which required a different solution. He had sat with Damian after his father died and helped prevent 3 captains from dividing the organization before the burial. Trust, built over 20 years, did not disappear because of one familiar phrase in a newspaper, but it could crack. Once cracked, it demanded inspection. No, Damian said. If Caleb notices surveillance, he will disappear behind people we cannot see. What do you want to do? Damian set the coffee down. Give him something worth leaking. That afternoon, Damian called 3 senior advisors into separate meetings. To Victor Hale, he said the Cross organization was preparing to abandon the Whitaker Alliance and pursue a private development agreement with a firm in New York. To another advisor, he said he intended to sell the lakefront project to a Canadian investment group. To Caleb, he offered a third version. Damian stood near the window while Caleb listened from the other side of the office. I will meet Sloan at the Bellwether estate Friday night, Damian said. No lawyers, no counsel. We will sign a private reconciliation agreement. Caleb's expression remained calm. That is wise. It is temporary. The public does not require permanence. It requires the appearance of control. No one can know until the papers are signed. Of course. Damian turned from the window. Not Richard Whitaker, not the council, no one. Caleb nodded. You have my word. Damian held his gaze for a moment, then he returned to the documents on his desk. Caleb left the office without hurry. 7 hours later, a reporter contacted the Whitaker family and asked whether Damian and Sloan planned to reconcile at the Bellwether estate. Mason delivered the message to Damian shortly after midnight. Only one person had received that location. Damian sat alone in his office when Mason placed the printed message on the desk. For a long time, Damian did not touch it. Rain moved against the windows. The city below looked distant and cold. He leaked it, Mason said. Damian picked up the page. Yes, Mason waited. What now? Damian folded the message once. We find out how much of my life belongs to him. The investigation widened. Mason's team traced Lakeshore Civic Partners through 5 companies in 3 states. The path ended at a private trust in Nevada controlled by an attorney who had represented Caleb for more than a decade. From there, the structure opened like a hidden room. Money had been redirected from construction projects into consulting fees. The fees moved through Northline Strategies' private investment accounts and offshore corporations. Some of the funds returned as political contributions. Others disappeared. The theft had not happened in a single dramatic act. It had happened quietly over years. A percentage here, an altered valuation there, a delay that required emergency consulting, a company selected because Caleb controlled both the problem and the solution. Mason placed copies of the records across the table. He did not only steal from you, he said. He made both families dependent on him. Damian read a series of internal messages. Caleb had encouraged the Whitakers to believe the Cross organization was unstable without political protection. At the same time, he had convinced Cross leaders that the Whitakers were the only defense against federal investigation. He had created fear on both sides, then sold himself as the bridge. The engagement was the final piece. Once Damian married Sloane, every major decision would pass through a structure Caleb had designed. Neither family would know where one empire ended and the other began. Mason handed Damian another file. "These authorizations carry your signature." Damian studied them. The signature looked correct. It was not his. "How many? We have confirmed 11. Damian closed the file. "Who else knows?" "Only the team in this room. Keep it that way." Mason looked at him. "There is enough here to remove Caleb tonight?" "No." "Why wait?" "Because men like Caleb do not build alone." Damian walked toward the wall. The photograph of Evelyn remained among the evidence. Her reputation had not been the target. It had been leverage. Caleb had seen Damian listening to someone outside his control. He had seen a school, a woman, and a group of children changing the way Damian made decisions. So he had attacked the place where that change began. Damian pulled the photograph from the wall. His fingers tightened around its edge. Mason spoke carefully. "This is not only business for you." "No, that can make a man careless." Damian looked at him. "It can also make him honest." Across the city, Sloane Whitaker stood in her father's study with Caleb's messages open on a tablet. She had found them by accident. Richard Whitaker had asked her to retrieve a development file from a locked cabinet. Inside, beneath the official contracts, she discovered printed correspondence between Caleb and her father's chief of staff. The earliest messages discussed zoning votes and political timing. The later ones discussed the engagement. Sloane read one sentence 3 times. "Sloane remains the necessary bridge. Her personal objections can be managed through family pressure." Another message described Damian as increasingly difficult to control. A final note proposed using media coverage to isolate Evelyn and force Damian back toward the alliance. Sloane lowered herself into her father's chair. For months, she had blamed Evelyn. It had been easier to hate a woman in a blue dress than admit that her own family had placed her inside a transaction and called it duty. The study door opened. Richard entered. "What are you doing?" Sloane turned the tablet toward him. His face changed. Only slightly. "That was enough. You knew." Richard closed the door. "These are strategic discussions. They describe me as a bridge. You are part of this family. That is not an answer. We all serve a purpose." Sloane stood. "Did Damian know no? Did you?" Her father looked toward the windows. "Caleb assured us the marriage would stabilize both organizations. He was stealing from both organizations. We did not know that. But you knew he was manipulating Damian." Richard's silence gave her the answer. Sloane looked around the study where she had spent childhood evenings waiting for her father to finish political calls. Every shelf displayed awards. Every photograph showed the family smiling beside donors, governors, and presidents. There was no photograph of them alone. "You told me this marriage would protect us," she said. "It still can." She stared at him. "You would continue after seeing this. If the alliance survives, we can remove Caleb later. And if Damian discovers we knew Richard's voice hardened, then you remind him that every powerful family makes compromises." Sloane picked up the tablet. "No." Her father stepped in front of the door. "You do not understand what is at risk." "For the first time, I think I do." She walked around him. Richard caught her arm. "Sloane." She looked down at his hand. He released her. "Where are you going?" "To speak to the woman I blamed for all of this." Evelyn was closing the music school when Sloane arrived. The last student had left. Chairs were stacked against the wall. The new piano sat beneath a cloth near the front classroom. Evelyn saw Sloane through the glass and stopped turning the lock. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Evelyn opened the door. "The school is closed. I know." Sloane stood beneath the streetlight with snow melting into her blonde hair. There was no driver behind her and no assistant holding an umbrella. "I came to apologize." Evelyn kept one hand on the door. "For the museum, for more than that." Sloane looked toward the empty classroom. I blamed you because blaming you was less humiliating than admitting Damian never chose me." Evelyn said nothing. Sloane continued. "I thought you had taken something that belonged to me. He did not belong to either of us. I know that now." Evelyn opened the door wider. Sloane entered. The building was quiet, except for the sound of a radiator clicking near the office. She looked at the children's drawings along the wall. "I used to play violin." Evelyn glanced at her. "How old were you?" 9. "Why did you stop?" "My mother said I did not have enough talent to justify the time." Evelyn looked at her for a moment. 9 is early to make a permanent decision. In my family, decisions are rarely temporary. Sloane placed the tablet on the piano. Caleb used both families. The engagement, the press, the development project. My father knew part of it. Evelyn read the messages. Her expression changed when she reached the lines about the school. "He planned this." "Yes. Have you shown Damian?" "Not yet." "Why come here first?" Sloane looked toward the dark windows. "If I give him this, my father may lose everything. Contracts, influence, possibly his freedom. And if you do not, Caleb keeps controlling both families. He keeps using the press against you. He may find another way to hurt the school." Evelyn returned the tablet. "You already know what the right choice is." Sloane laughed softly without humor. "Is it always that simple for you, no?" Evelyn walked toward the piano and removed the cloth. "It is simply still right." Sloane stared at the keys. "My entire life people told me survival required compromise. Sometimes it does. And when does compromise become surrender, when you can no longer recognize the person making it?" The answer settled over the room. Sloane touched one piano key. The note sounded alone. "I was cruel to you." "Yes, I expected you to make that easier. I am not going to lie so you can apologize comfortably." Sloane looked at her. Then for the first time she smiled without calculation. "I understand why he listens to you." Evelyn covered the piano again. "He does not always, but he returns." "Yes." Sloane picked up the tablet. "I will take this to him." Evelyn walked her to the door. "Sloane," she turned. "You were also used. That does not erase what you did, but it means you can choose what you do now." Sloane nodded once. Then she stepped back into the snow. The next evening, Damian entered the music school after the final lesson. He removed his gun at the door and placed it on the office desk. Evelyn noticed. "You remembered. I am capable of learning. That remains under review." He almost smiled. Then the silence between them returned. The last time they had stood this close, she had told him she could not care for the man who used fear as his first language. Damian looked toward the classroom. "The reporters are gone." "Yes. I did not threaten them. I know. I wanted to, I assumed." He placed both hands in his coat pockets. "I was wrong. About the reporters, about fear." Evelyn waited. "It works quickly," he said. "That is why men like me become addicted to it." Outside, a train moved across distant tracks. Damian continued. "Fear clears rooms. It ends arguments. It makes people obey before they understand what they are agreeing to. And silence can look like respect from far away." "Yes." Evelyn studied his face. He looked tired. Not physically. Tired in the way of a man who had begun examining the structure of his own life and discovered rot beneath the walls. "I do not expect forgiveness because I apologized," he said. "That is progress. I need to end something Caleb built." Her expression sharpened. "You know it was him." "Yes." Damian told her about the leak, the accounts, and the forged signatures. He did not hide the consequences. The Whitakers might withdraw, the council might split. Federal investigators could reopen cases tied to projects Caleb had controlled. Some of Damian's legitimate companies would survive, others would not. "What will it cost you?" Evelyn asked. "Influence, contracts, people who stayed because they believed I could never lose, and are you willing to lose them?" Damian looked at the old upright piano. "I spent my life believing power meant never losing anything." He met her eyes. "You taught me that sometimes the thing a man refuses to lose is the thing controlling him." Evelyn's expression softened, but she did not move closer. "Then make the right choice when no one is there to reward you." Damian nodded. "I intend to." He picked up his gun from the desk but did not place it beneath his coat until he had stepped outside. The council meeting began at 10 the following morning. Leaders from both families filled the Cross conference room. Richard Whittaker sat beside his attorney. Sloane sat on his other side, the tablet resting in front of her. Caleb entered last. He looked calm. He believed the meeting concerned reconciliation. Damian waited until the doors closed. Then he placed 3 printed messages on the table. To Victor Hale, I said we were negotiating with New York. Victor looked up. To Michael Grant, I said we were selling to a Canadian group. Michael shifted in his chair. To Caleb, I said Sloane and I would meet at Bellwether. Damian looked at his former advisor. Only one version reached the press. Caleb did not react. A reporter guessed. A reporter named the estate. Richard turned toward Caleb. What is this? Caleb folded his hands. An attempt to distract from Damian's instability. Mason placed a second file on the table. Inside were bank transfers, ownership records, and forged authorizations. One by one, the documents moved around the room. The confidence in Caleb's face began to thin. These records are incomplete, he said. They are sufficient, Damian answered. You do not understand the structures involved. I understand that you stole from companies you advised me to trust. I moved funds to protect them, from whom federal seizure, political interference, your own impulsive decisions. Damian's voice remained calm. You forged my signature. I acted in the interest of the organization. Sloane unlocked the tablet, and in the interest of mine, Caleb looked toward her. She read his message aloud. Sloane remains the necessary bridge. Her personal objections can be managed through family pressure. Richard closed his eyes. Sloane placed the tablet on the table. Was I part of the organization too? Caleb's composure cracked. You were part of an alliance larger than your feelings. Sloane leaned back. That sounds familiar. The room shifted. Several Cross captains began speaking at once. One demanded an explanation for the offshore accounts. Another asked how much money had disappeared. Richard's attorney whispered urgently beside him. Caleb raised his voice. Without the Whittaker alliance, federal investigations reopen, contracts collapse, rivals move against every person in this room. The shouting faded. Caleb looked around the table. You may dislike what I did, but you benefited from it. An older captain named Joseph Marin turned to Damian. He may be a traitor, but he is not wrong about the consequences. Damian looked at every face around the table. These men had followed him because he had never allowed uncertainty to show. They expected him to preserve power, even if preserving it required another lie. Damian removed the cross signet ring from his finger. He placed it on the table. The engagement is finished. Richard stood. You will lose the lakefront project. Then I lose it. You will lose political protection. Then I will discover what protection was worth. Joseph leaned forward. Half the council may leave. Then I will know which half was loyal. Caleb stared at Damian. You would burn everything for Evelyn. Hart. Damian looked at him. No. The room became still. I am burning what was built on lies. Caleb's face hardened. You are not strong enough to survive without the system I created. Damian stood. You created an empire beneath mine and mistook secrecy for ownership. Mason moved toward Caleb. 2 guards followed. Caleb looked around the room for support. No one stood. As Mason took his arm, Caleb turned toward Damian. She will never belong in your world. Damian's expression did not change. Then my world is the thing that must change. Caleb was escorted from the room. The consequences began before the doors closed behind him. Richard Whittaker withdrew from the development project. 2 Cross captains resigned by the end of the day. 3 political allies stopped returning calls. Federal attorneys requested records from companies Caleb had managed. News channels described the organization as divided. Damian sold controlling interests in 2 logistics companies and placed the remaining legitimate businesses under independent review. He dissolved several operations he could no longer defend without repeating Caleb's methods. His empire became smaller. His days became quieter. For the first time in 20 years, no one sat beside him explaining which truth was useful. Sloane removed the engagement portrait from the main hall of the Whittaker estate. Her mother watched from the staircase. You should fight for him. Sloane looked at the photograph. Damian stood beside her in a black suit. Neither of them smiled with their eyes. I spent years fighting for a contract and calling it love. What will you do now? Sloane set the portrait against the wall. Something I chose. At the music school, the reporters slowly disappeared. Parents returned. The Veterans Program found a new sponsor through Julian's foundation. The landlord agreed to sell the building to an independent community trust after local families raised enough money for the first payment. Damian did not arrive with another check. He came on Saturday morning carrying a toolbox. A music stand had broken near the front classroom. Rosie watched him tighten the screws. "You are doing it wrong." Damian looked at the instructions. "I am following the diagram. The tall piece goes on the other side." He studied the stand. She was right. He turned it around. Rosie nodded. "You are getting better at being corrected. I have an aggressive teacher." Evelyn heard him from the doorway. "I heard that. I assumed." He did not ask whether she forgave him. He did not offer another apology. He repaired the stand, moved folding chairs, and stayed for the beginner recital. When his lesson began, he sat at the piano and opened his music book. The gold star from his first correct measure still clung to the corner of the page. Rosie listened from the next bench. Damian played the piece from beginning to end. He missed 3 notes. When he finished, Rosie considered the performance seriously. "Last month you missed 9. I remember. That is less terrible." She placed another gold star beside the first. Damian looked toward the doorway. Evelyn stood there with one shoulder against the frame. Her smile was small. It was not forgiveness offered all at once. It was something quieter, a door left open. By the beginning of spring, the annual recital program was printed and stacked on Evelyn's desk. Near the bottom of the list, beneath the names of children and veterans, one beginner had agreed to perform the melody his mother once played, Damian Cross. By the time spring reached Chicago, the snow along the sidewalks had turned gray. The river had lost its winter stillness, and the Hart Community Music House had begun to sound alive again. The front windows stayed open during afternoon lessons. Children carried violin cases through the doors. Veterans gathered near the coffee table before rehearsal. Parents who had once avoided the cameras now stood in the hallway discussing recital clothes transportation and whether 7-year-olds truly needed sugar before performing. The annual recital was 3 days away. Every classroom contained a different kind of panic. Rosie Alvarez had forgotten the middle of her piece twice and blamed the piano bench. Frank Delaney had memorized his music but continued carrying the pages because he believed the notes behaved better when watched. Nina moved between rooms with a clipboard, a roll of tape, and the expression of a woman preventing a small country from collapsing. Evelyn stood in the center of it all. She adjusted collars, marked measures, repaired music folders, and reminded students to breathe. Her voice remained calm even when 3 children began playing 3 separate songs in the same room. Near the front entrance, Damian Cross carried folding chairs from the storage closet. He wore dark trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, and no jacket. The cross signet ring no longer sat on his hand. The pale mark it had left was beginning to fade. A boy named Lucas followed him with a stack of paper programs. "Mr. Cross, my mother says you used to own half the city." Damian set down 2 chairs. "Your mother exaggerates. She says you scared a mayor. That mayor frightened easily." Lucas considered this. "Are you still scary?" Damian looked toward Evelyn. She was helping Rosie untangle a ribbon from her hair, only when necessary. Rosie heard him. "You were scared of measure 16. I was not scared. You skipped it for 2 weeks. I was evaluating alternative interpretations." "You were scared." Damian looked at Lucas. "Children have become too confident in this building." Evelyn crossed the room carrying a box of recital programs. "You helped create that problem." He took the box from her. "I carried 24 chairs and announced every one of them. They are heavy. They are folding chairs." Damian placed the box on the front desk. Evelyn watched him for a moment. Months earlier, he would have arrived surrounded by armed men. He would have paid a crew to move the chairs, replaced the chairs with better ones, and purchased the building before anyone could refuse. Now Mason waited outside with 1 car. Damian came inside carrying tools. He listened when volunteers gave instructions. He asked before moving anything. The change had not been immediate. It had not been easy. Some days Evelyn saw the old instinct rise behind his eyes when a reporter approached too closely or a board member questioned his money. But he paused now. He listened. Sometimes he still became loud. He simply apologized sooner. Damian looked toward the recital program in Evelyn's hand. "My name is still there." "You agreed to perform." "I agreed while Rosie was staring at me. That does not invalidate the agreement. It should." Rosie climbed onto a chair. "You cannot quit." Damian turned. "I did not say I was quitting. You looked like you wanted to. I often look that way. Miss Hart says courage is doing it while you look like that." Evelyn smiled. Damian picked up one of the programs. Near the end, beneath the names of children, veterans, and adult beginners, appeared a single line. Damian Cross piano. No title, no company. No indication that the man had once controlled decisions affecting half the city. Only his name and the instrument that still refused to fear him. He folded the program and placed it inside his pocket. That evening, after the final students left, Evelyn found him alone in the main classroom. He sat at the upright piano beneath the paper stars. The room was quiet except for the steady ticking of the metronome he had given the school. Damian played the first measures of his mother's melody. His hands were no longer rigid. He still watched the keys too carefully, but the notes came with more ease than before. Evelyn leaned against the doorway. "You are rushing the second line." He continued playing. "You always say that because you always rush it. I am creating tension. You are avoiding the difficult measure." He stopped. The silence between them felt comfortable now. Damian looked at her. "Come here." Evelyn crossed the room and sat beside him. He moved slightly to make space. Their shoulders touched. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Evelyn placed one finger on the music. "You begin speeding up here." "I know. Why? Because I want to reach the ending before I make a mistake." Evelyn looked at him. "That is not how music works. No, it is not how most things work." Damian studied her face. There were moments when he still expected her to disappear. The expectation was buried beneath every calm conversation. Every shared cup of coffee every evening, she allowed him to remain after the school closed. He had spent his life believing that people stayed because they were protected, paid, or afraid. Evelyn stayed because she chose to. That made her presence more powerful and more fragile than anything he had ever possessed. He looked back at the music. "I have something to ask you after the recital." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "That sounds suspicious. It is a question. About the foundation of the building, no. Did you purchase another piano, no?" She studied him. Damian kept his expression still. Evelyn touched the gold star beside the first page of his music. "Then I will wait. You are not going to continue guessing I teach children. I have developed patience. You use most of it on me, yes." He returned his hands to the keys. This time he did not rush. The recital began on Saturday evening. The auditorium had been transformed with paper flowers, warm lights, and a hand-painted sign created by the students. Every chair was occupied. Additional guests stood along the walls. There were no television crews, no velvet ropes, no city officials waiting to turn the evening into a campaign photograph. Only families, teachers, veterans, neighbors, and people who had helped the school survive. Julian Reed sat near the aisle. His foundation had secured grants for Evelyn's regional music program and arranged partnerships with schools in Detroit and Baltimore. He had offered Evelyn an office downtown. She had refused. Instead, the office would remain above the music school beside a storage room filled with broken instrument cases. Sloane Whitaker arrived alone. She wore a dark green dress and took a seat in the final row. Several people recognized her. She ignored their whispers. Her father was facing investigations tied to Caleb's financial network. The Whitaker name no longer opened every door in Chicago. Sloane had spent the past months working with attorneys, turning over records, and separating herself from the political machine that had shaped her life. She did not expect Damian to forgive her. She had not come for him. She had come because Evelyn had sent her an invitation. Backstage, Rosie stood with both hands pressed against her stomach. I cannot remember the middle. Evelyn knelt in front of her. "You remembered it this morning. It left. Where did it go, I do not know. Then we will find it." Rosie looked toward the curtain. "There are too many people. They are here because they want you to succeed. That makes it worse." Evelyn smiled. What happens when we forget Rosie took a breath? We breathe, and then we listen. And then Rosie looked toward the piano. We find the next note. Evelyn straightened the ribbon in her hair. That is all you need. Rosie nodded, though she still looked unconvinced. Damian stood nearby in a navy suit. He watched Evelyn send Rosie toward the stage. The applause began as the child stepped into the light. Damian touched the small velvet box inside his coat. Mason noticed the movement. You have checked it 6 times. Damian looked at him. I have not. I counted. You have too little work. Your schedule has become less violent. I can correct that. Mason looked toward the box. You are certain? Damian watched Evelyn from the side of the curtain. She stood with one hand over her heart as Rosie began to play. No. Mason raised an eyebrow. Damian continued. The first time I was certain of the arrangement, the alliance, the room, and every person inside it. And the woman, I never looked at her. Rosie missed the beginning of the middle section. Her hand stopped. She stared at the keys. No one in the audience moved. Evelyn remained in the wings. Rosie breathed. She listened. Then she found the next note. The piece continued. Damian looked at Mason. This time I am certain about the woman. One student followed another. Lucas played a violin piece with one string slightly out of tune. A group of veterans performed a rhythm exercise. An elderly couple played a duet and argued quietly over the tempo without stopping. Frank Delaney walked onto the stage near the middle of the program. He no longer looked toward the exit. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and began. His left hand still trembled. The melody did not. When he reached the final chord, he held it for a moment before lifting his hands. The audience rose. Frank looked toward Evelyn. She nodded. He smiled. Near the end of the recital, Rosie returned to the microphone. We have one more beginner. Damian's expression changed. Evelyn looked at Rosie. That was not in the program. Rosie ignored her. This student is old. The audience laughed. Damian closed his eyes briefly. Rosie continued. He argues a lot. He does not like stickers, and he used to play every song like the piano owed him money. Mason looked toward the floor to hide a smile. But he practices now. Rosie pointed toward the curtain. Mr. Cross. Applause moved through the auditorium. Damian looked at Evelyn. You approve this? I did not. You are smiling. That does not prove anything. He stepped onto the stage. The room changed when people recognized him. Some guests became quiet. Others sat straighter. The old reaction remained, though it had softened inside these walls. Damian crossed to the piano. Rosie stood beside the bench. You have to bow. No, everyone bows. I am not bowing. Rosie waited. Damian looked toward Evelyn. She lifted one eyebrow. He gave the audience a small bow. Rosie nodded in approval and left the stage. Damian sat. Under the lights, the piano looked larger than it had during lessons. He placed the sheet music in front of him, even though he no longer needed it. His hands rested above the keys. For years, Damian had entered rooms knowing exactly how others would react. Fear had a predictable rhythm. Power did too. This room offered no such certainty. The children knew every mistake he had ever made at the piano. The veterans had watched him struggle through beginner scales. Evelyn had heard him begin the same measure 20 times. There was nothing left to hide. He began the melody his mother had played when he was a child. The first notes came softly. A memory rose with them. His mother seated at a dark piano in a house that never felt warm. His father standing in the doorway calling music weakness. The piano closing after her death. The silence that followed for 30 years. Damian continued. The second line remained steady. At the difficult measure, his fingers moved too quickly. He struck the wrong note. The sound was clear, unmistakable. A few months earlier, he would have stopped. He would have started over or left the bench before anyone could see the failure settle into him. Now he breathed. He listened to the note fading through the auditorium. Then he placed his fingers on the keys and found the next one. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Damian finished the melody. The last chord remained beneath his hands. For 1 second, there was silence. Then the audience rose. The applause struck him with a force he had not expected. Not because the performance was perfect. It was not. They applauded because he had stayed. Rosie ran onto the stage carrying a gold star. Damian saw her coming. No, you earned it. Rosie. She pressed the sticker onto the lapel of his suit. The audience laughed. Damian looked down at the star, then toward Evelyn. She was laughing through her tears. He left the sticker where it was. The final student ensemble performed after him. Children played beside adults. Frank kept the rhythm on a small drum. Evelyn conducted with a pencil because someone had misplaced the baton. When the final note ended, the audience applauded again. Evelyn stepped toward the microphone. "Thank you for believing that music should belong to everyone." Behind her, students began to leave the stage. The auditorium lights remained on. Evelyn glanced toward Nina. Nina looked toward Damian. Damian walked from the side curtain carrying the velvet box. The room quieted. Evelyn saw the box before she saw his face. Her breath stopped. Damian stood several feet away from her. The first time he had approached without looking. This time he looked at nothing else. Sloane watched from the last row. Julian leaned back in his chair. Rosie covered her mouth with both hands. Damian reached the center of the stage. Evelyn Hart. His voice carried without effort. She looked at the gold star on his jacket. "You kept it. I was not given a choice." A quiet laugh moved through the room. Damian held the box at his side. "The first time I stood in front of you with this ring, I was certain of everything except the woman beside me." Evelyn's eyes shone. "I believed the room mattered. I believed the agreement mattered. I believed a future could be decided before anyone involved had the courage to speak honestly." He opened the box. The diamond caught the stage lights. Several people in the audience inhaled. "I put this ring on your hand without asking your name. You knew my name." "Not until after. That is worse." The room laughed again. Damian nodded. "Yes." His expression became serious. "I thought power meant choosing the future and expecting everyone else to accept it." He looked toward the children gathered beside the curtain. "Then you returned the ring." Evelyn smiled. "You corrected me in front of 300 people. You needed correcting." "I did." Damian lowered himself onto one knee. The auditorium became completely still. He did not reach for her hand. He held the open box between them. "I do not want to own your future. I do not want to protect you by controlling your life. I do not want you to enter a world you never chose because I am afraid to leave it behind." Evelyn's smile faded into something deeper. Damian continued, "I want to build something honest beside you." His voice lowered. "You taught me that listening is not surrender. You taught me that mistakes do not become permanent unless a man refuses to face them. You taught me that I could lose power and still remain standing." He took a breath. "The first time I put this ring on the wrong woman without asking?" A slight smile touched his mouth. "This time I am asking the right woman before I touch her hand." His eyes remained on hers. "Evelyn Hart, will you marry me?" No one moved. Evelyn looked at the ring, then at Damian. She stepped closer. "What happens when you are afraid again?" Damian did not hesitate. "I tell you. What happens when your first instinct is to control everything? I stop before Mason begins taking cameras." Mason looked toward the ceiling. Several parents laughed. Evelyn continued. "What happens when we disagree? I listen before I become loud." Rosie whispered to Frank. She taught him that. Frank nodded. "What happens when the truth costs you something?" Evelyn asked. Damian's expression changed. It was the question beneath every other question. "The truth has already cost me something. That was not what I asked." "No." He looked at her hand resting at her side. "When it costs me again, I choose it again." Evelyn held his gaze. The silence continued long enough for the room to disappear around them. Then she extended her left hand. "Yes." The audience erupted. Children shouted. Parents rose. Frank wiped his eyes with both hands. Nina embraced Rosie before the child could run onto the stage. Damian looked at Evelyn's hand. "You are certain," she smiled. "Ask me again and I may reconsider." He removed the ring from the box. His hands were steady as he slid it onto her finger. It fit exactly as it had the first time. This time Evelyn did not remove it. She looked down at the diamond. "You are fortunate. Why, I did not want to return this thing twice." Damian stood. Evelyn placed both hands against his face and kissed him. The applause grew louder. For once, Damian did not notice who was watching. At the back of the room, Sloane remained standing. Evelyn looked over Damian's shoulder and found her. Sloane gave a small nod. Then she picked up her coat and walked quietly toward the exit. Outside, the evening air was cool. Sloane stopped beneath the auditorium lights. For years she had believed losing Damian meant losing the future selected for her. Now, the city stood open before her, without instructions. She walked toward it alone. Inside, Rosie had taken the microphone. "Mr. Cross gets 2 stars. Damian turned. 1 is sufficient, 1 for playing and 1 for asking correctly. That is not an established system. It is now." She pressed another sticker beside the first. The wedding took place 6 months later. Evelyn refused the Blackstone Grand Hotel. Damian did not argue. They married in the courtyard behind the music school beneath strings of warm lights. Folding chairs replaced velvet seats. Students performed the music. Frank walked Evelyn halfway down the aisle before Nina joined him for the rest. Mason stood beside Damian. Rosie carried the rings and informed every guest that she had supervised the proposal. Julian attended with several musicians from his foundation. Sloane sent white roses with a handwritten card. This time, choose the life that chooses you back. Damian read the message once, then placed it beside the guest book. When Evelyn reached him, she wore a simple ivory dress and the diamond ring that had once caused a scandal across Chicago. Damian looked at her before saying a word. She noticed. Checking, yes, good. He took her hand only after she offered it. 1 year after the recital, morning sunlight filled the entrance of the Hart Music Foundation. The new building stood 3 blocks from the original school. It had been purchased through community donations, independent grants, and legally documented funds from Damian's remaining businesses. The foundation provided free music lessons for children, veterans, older adults, and families who could not afford private education. Nothing inside carried the Cross name. A plaque near the entrance read, "Every heart deserves a song." Evelyn moved through the hallways with a stack of lesson plans. Marriage had not made her quieter. Money had not made her less careful. She still questioned every donation, inspected every contract, and refused to let Damian solve problems before the board discussed them. Damian's empire was smaller. Several companies were gone. Political allies no longer returned every call. He spent more time with attorneys and independent auditors than with captains and councilmen. Some people in Chicago believed he had become weak. Those people rarely said it near him. He still understood power. He had simply stopped confusing it with fear. On Tuesday afternoons, Damian taught a beginner rhythm class. His students ranged from 6 to 74. He was only slightly more advanced than most of them. Again, he said, tapping the rhythm against the piano. A little boy struck the drum too early. Damian stopped. The child lowered his head. "Sorry." Damian looked at the boy. "Why, I got it wrong. So did I." "You are the teacher. Today." The child smiled. They began again. In the hallway, Evelyn watched through the glass. Rosie stood beside her now, 8 years old and carrying a folder filled with music. "He is still rushing." "Yes." "Are you going to tell him I tell him every day? Does he listen eventually?" That evening, after the foundation closed, Evelyn found Damian alone in the main classroom. He sat at the piano beneath the first 2 gold stars Rosie had given him. They had been framed and placed on the wall despite his objections. He was playing his mother's melody. Evelyn entered quietly. Damian reached the difficult measure. He struck the wrong note. The sound faded. Evelyn leaned against the doorway. "You missed the F." He looked over his shoulder. "I was hoping marriage might make you less critical. You married the wrong woman for that." Damian turned back toward the keys. "No." He looked at the ring on her finger. "For once I chose exactly the right one." Evelyn sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. She placed her hands over the lower keys. Damian began the melody again. This time she joined him. Their timing was imperfect. One of them moved too quickly. The other entered too late. Neither stopped. Outside, Chicago moved beneath the evening lights. Inside, their hands continued across the keys, finding the music between the mistakes.